We're now live.
Thank you very much indeed. Right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this evening's Place Scrutiny panel meeting held on Zoom on the 2nd of February 2023. Just quickly scrolling here, bear with me 1 second. So before we get too carried away, are there any declarations of interests from members, pecuniary or other?
Sorry, Chair, you need to do the substitutes and apologies first.
Yes, of course. Right, let's start with that then. Yes, number one, always a good place to start. Right, yes, do we have any substitute nomination for this meeting and any apologies?
We do, Chair. We have Councillor Tremaine substituting for Councillor Thompson, and we have apologies from Councillor Thompson and Councillor Clark.
Right, lovely. Thank you very much indeed. And therefore, yeah, we can move swiftly on to number two, which is, of course, members' interests now. Any pecuniary, disclosable pecuniary interests or other interests that you may have related to the items on the agenda this evening? No, not particularly. We do have live streaming on YouTube in terms of being available to open to the public. And moving on to number four, the minutes of the Place Scrutiny Board meeting held on the 5th of January. I was very sorry not to be present at that one. I was away attending a funeral on that particular day. Fortunately, it wasn't mine, so not too bad. Do we have any proposals and seconders as a yes? Is that Councillor Dave Young and Councillor Audrey Smith proposing and seconding that they are a correct record? All those in favour? Yep, thank you. None against. Thank you very much indeed. Right, thank you for that. I hope that was an interesting one for you anyway. Number five, I'd like to welcome Ian Day as the new Director of Public Services to bring an oral report. Good evening, Ian. Welcome. I'm all ears.
Evening, Councillor. I think it's just a couple of minute introduction from myself, if that's okay. So it's a real pleasure to be here and to meet you all. I just thought I'd give you a minute or two about me and what makes me tick and what I've done, and then happy to take any questions that people have got. So we moved just outside the edge of the borough actually in about 2016, and very quickly found ourselves facing into the borough for everything that we felt we needed in life, in terms of shopping down in Halifax, cycling over to Hebden, walking on the hills above Ogden. So it's been a real long ambition for mine for several years to work in the borough, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have been appointed as your Director of Public Services, and it feels a real privilege to have been offered the job. My background is in public sector for the vast majority of my working life, and a large part of that just across the board down in Bradford, with a short spell of time up at Craven as well. And recently have managed most of those services that sit within this current portfolio, either in Bradford or up in Craven. Prior to that, I've spent a lot of time on service transformation, so led a large insourcing programme for Bradford Council. I've been involved in several large lottery funded projects, and also did an awful lot of work around budget reduction, so managing a business transformation programme to take funding out of the council's resources, and then have a background back in parks and open spaces. The work that I led in the neighbourhood service led me into our operational COVID response, and it was a pleasure to come across a lot of the Calderdale colleagues in the regional meetings that took place in the response to the pandemic that was carried out. I guess perhaps one of the more interesting pieces of work I've led recently is our Integrated Communities programme, which is a government-funded piece of work, and we were given £3.4 million to try out different projects that to see the impact that would have in terms of bringing communities together. And through that was asked to join the Council of Europe working group to develop model policy for governments and regional, local and national governments on intercultural integration of migrants. So I spent a couple of years working with colleagues from across national and local government in Europe and beyond, producing that model strategy, which has been a really incredible learning experience. And hopefully I'll be able to bring some of those skills and experiences that I've acquired in those different roles into my job in Calderdale. So it's day 4 in post. Feels in some ways very much like the newbie, but also it's there's an awful lot happened the last 4 days. It's a busy old job, and it's really helped me to hit the ground running. But I would have to say that the welcome I've received from colleagues, from CLT, from cabinet members, has been absolutely outstanding, and it feels like a place that is going to be a great place to be. And I'm really looking forward to working with Andrew and with Sarah and with Carl, the new AD for IT and digital, to move things forward for you on our public services. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much. Members, do we have any questions that we'd like to ask Mr. Day at this point? Nope. Okay. Well, on behalf of the board, I'd like to say welcome to Calderdale, and I hope you have it's going to be testing, I'm sure of it, but I hope you get to have some fun whilst you're at it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to propose moving on to the main body of the work this evening, but in terms of a little bit of housekeeping, as before on Zoom, rather than physically raising hands, if you could use the raise hand icon, please, because it does bring you to the top left-hand corner of my screen, and gives me a good sense of the order in which people have asked wish to ask questions. But I will then, if officers or cabinet members wish to come back, give them priority, as you kind of know the drill already, and this is an established format that seems to work reasonably well amidst all the chaos. So moving on, do we have anyone from the cabinet or officers who are going to present the outline of the budget proposals this evening?
I think that's probably me.
Good evening, Councillor Dacre. If you want to put your head on the block and yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Chair. So you'll all have had the consultation document, I'm sure, and have read it. And I suppose there are just a few things I want to draw attention to. So on the first page of the leader's introduction, it mentions that the proposed cabinet budget's built around 3 key principles, and that's firstly investing in social care. The second is maintaining existing spending levels on frontline services to avoid the need for any further damaging reductions, and delivering a robust and balanced budget, which also looks towards how we might look at our finances in the next 2 years during the period of uncertainty. And the leader's introduction also notes that we're again faced with a 1-year only settlement from government, which does not enable us to plan and is in contradiction of the promise that we got from the then Secretary for Levelling Up, Michael Gove, in the summer, that we would get a 2-year settlement this time round. So it was a huge disappointment to all councils that we ended up with a 1 year again. And of course, like all other councils, we're under extreme financial pressure, which comes after the cuts that all councils pretty much have been receiving for the last 12 years. And on top of that, we now have inflation and the turbulence that took place during the short-lived Liz Truss premiership, which did nothing for the stability or for inflation. The one, if you can say, good thing that came out of that is that interest rates are higher. And as a result of that, we are anticipating that on the money that we have invested, because we obviously get money in while it's before it's spent, and we can invest that money on the money that that's being invested, we can expect higher returns. So we're expecting to make more money on that, which has helped us avoid cuts this year. The other thing that I think it's important to touch on is that when the government announced the increase in council's core spending power of in the region of 9% this year, it built into that figure the expectation that councils would raise council tax by the maximum that they were allowed to under the referendum levels. And indeed, it increased the referendum levels to enable us to raise council tax by 3% and the adult social care levy by 2%. So it was expected of us all that we do that. And the only way that, in fact, we can all keep services going is, in fact, by going along with that. And I'm only aware of one council in the whole country so far that has declined to raise its council tax to the maximum, because when we're faced with the choice of having to cut both public services, the sorts of services that you're concerned with in this scrutiny, the ones that people see every day, the bins, the parks, the roads, and also protecting the vulnerable, the elderly, the working age disabled, children at risk, faced with having the choice between making cuts to those services or raising council tax, we felt we had no option but to raise council tax. I'd make the point that I've made in the past that we do continue to have one of the more generous council tax reduction schemes, certainly in West Yorkshire and compared to many other councils. And that does enable us to help those who are worst off with their council tax. But we do appreciate that even those who are not at the very bottom of the pile are still going to find things difficult this year. But as I say, it was the harsh choice between that or cutting services. And we felt that we, in the interests of our residents and the wider community, had no option there. So the other things that are perhaps particularly relevant to place are that you'll note that there is to be an investment this year in what is described. I mean, my copy isn't page number, but I've numbered it myself. It's page 6, where there's the updated table, and there's going to be investment in housing standards enforcement, and that's going to be the recruitment of 4 enforcement officers. They're going to work across both private and social rented sectors, but perhaps with an emphasis on the private. And there's a number of things have prompted this. You'll know that the Grenfell Tower report is coming out, and that may have implications for our enforcement of rented accommodation, or our interaction with rented accommodation. There's the report on the little boy who died in Rochdale, which has already been published, and which was about social housing, but was also raises the expectations on councils that we are going to be proactive about ensuring that the damp and the mold problems that led to that little boy's death do not happen again. And in terms, then that was obviously a social landlord, but in terms of private landlords, they vary a great deal. Some are large organisations with capacity to manage their properties. Many other private rented properties are owned that somebody may have 1 or 2, and they may not even realise what some of their responsibilities are. And so it's the enforcement officers, as is the case with all council enforcement, really will work with people first of all to try and get them to do the right thing first, and enforcement will be a last resort. Apart from anything else, of course, it's costly to enforce, so we will try to work with people first. The other thing which I hope they're going to be able to help private landlords with is that, I'm not sure whether it's actually coming to force or whether it's still proposed, but there's certainly expectations on private landlords that they will be providing energy efficient housing, and that's something else that we want. Even if it doesn't become statutory, we want to ensure that our tenants in Calderdale are in properties which do not cost more than they need to heat, and that's both good for their income and their health. So that's another thing that we want to be leading on. So that was the background to that investment. And obviously the council, we as a Labour administration have those three priorities of tackling inequalities, thriving towns, and tackling the climate emergency. And we actually feel that this investment, it sort of obviously in a way falls into the tackling inequalities, but it also really plays into those other two priorities as well. So those, and also of course you'll note that there is an indication in the report that whilst we don't know exactly what our position is going to be in the next 2 years, we are going to start, and in fact already have started, looking into a range of areas which are listed, starting on page 5 of the parking charges review, which we think there may be scope for further savings in. Now, it may turn out that actually we can't find any further savings, and so, but it's important that we do actually start and examine those areas, and that might be something that you want to ask more about, because obviously the parking charges, waste delivery, highways, it's they're all areas that are relevant to you. So I think that's probably enough from me.
Smashing. Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Dacre. You've actually answered a couple of questions that I had with regards to things I had in mind. So at this point, I'd like to open it to questions from members, and straight off the blocks, Councillor Young. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Young. Sorry, mate. You're on mute.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. And question is obviously for Councillor Dacre. As far as if I've read the document correctly, there's no cuts to neighbourhoods for 23-24. But the question I wanted to ask Sylvia was that, did we agree any cuts to neighbourhoods last year that will be taken up in 23-24?
Now then, I don't think we did. The cuts that I can think that spring to mind that were going to take effect this year were not in neighbourhoods. They were in adult social care and across the council in relation to things like the parish council precepts. I can't think of any in neighbourhoods. Jenny, Councillor Lynn May, it's her portfolio, and if there are, I'm sure she'll know.
Chair, shall I just come in on that?
Yes, please. Yes, thank you.
Yes. No, no, we were not subject to any cuts there. But on the other hand, what I would say is that we have suffered, as have a number of other aspects of areas of the council which generate income, in a decline in our income, largely as a result of the effect of the pandemic. So, for example, when budgets are set, they include not only what the costs are of delivering the service, but also if you can offset against those costs income that you're going to derive. And of course, the sources of income from things like parking charges, but also like the use of our leisure services, for example, that's been affected. And I guess Sheila O'Neill is here from Regeneration Strategy, and she may very well want to comment on any impact in declines in income in her service area. But yeah, no, it's not that we're carrying forward cuts there, but it is that we were impacted to some extent by declines in income last year as a result of the overhang from the pandemic. Hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lynn. Anybody else at this point? Oh, thank you. Yeah, I saw the hand, Steph. Councillor Clark, thank you. And then Councillor Smith. You're still on, Councillor Clark, you're still on mute. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dickinson, Chair. I was just about to use the raise hand function. I'm just inquiring about the private sector housing part. Whose department would it come under? how will the money be spent? I mean, obviously 4 planning enforcement officers is great. That's not planning. 4 enforcement officers, that would be great. Is that where all the money would be spent, or are there other things that might be in there as well?
I think in terms of where it will sit, I think again, Councillor Lynn can clarify, but I think it's going to be lie with Derek Ben.
Okay, yeah.
And in terms of the money, yes, I think the majority of that money is about salaries.
Okay. We've recently enlisted a private liaison officer, a landlord stroke tenant liaison officer. Is that money included in this pot this year?
Chair, would you like me to respond?
Yes, please. I thought it might come under your directorate, Sheila. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't. Good evening, Chair, members of the committee and colleagues. So the investment growth is actually not entirely dedicated to enforcement officers. So what will happen is that there will be an investment in 2 dedicated housing enforcement officers who will respond to the increased expectation and profile around, in particular, housing standards. And as Councillor Dacre said in her introduction, driven in part, a large part, by the really tragic circumstances of Awa Bishak's death. But in addition to that, one of the challenges that Derek and his colleagues face in public services in that enforcement role is the very onerous and prescribed process that they have to follow. So to support that process, they need legal capacity. So there will be some support through the legal team. And in addition to that, I understand that there is an element of that funding that will be directed at additional building control support, because as Councillor Dacre said again, we're awaiting the final results of phase 2 of the Grenfell inquiry, but we also have the Building Safety Act 2022, which will be coming into force, and that significantly changes the role of building control within local authorities. And we will become registered building inspectors reporting directly to that building safety regulator. So we're in a very shifting landscape at the moment, and it's not fixed, but what we do know is that we've talked a little bit about income reducing, but we've also got this increased demand on our services. And so it's not funding that tenant liaison officer, but it will be working very closely. And whilst the operational delivery sits in public services, as Director of Regeneration and Strategy with the housing delivery teams, I'm the strategic lead for housing. So we'll be working very closely with Ian as the new Director of Public Services. And you'll be aware, members, that as a result of Awa Bishak's death, we had to respond to the Secretary of State, Michael Gove, around our approach to housing standards and building safety. So we sent an interim response on the 27th of November, and we sent our final response on the 25th of January, setting out exactly how we approach the issues of damp and mould and what we will be doing in future. And we did also reference the investment that Council are proposing to make, although we did say that will be ratified at a future meeting. So I hope that that's clear. It's a shared responsibility, but with very clear reporting lines and working practices.
Thank you. Yeah.
That's great. Does that answer your question, Councillor Clark?
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Lynn's brought her hand down as a result, I think. Yeah, fair enough. Councillor Smith, good evening.
Yeah, good evening. Thank you. Just about the salaries, because in the public services, the additional budget sheet that we were sent round, it shows that salaries don't really increase very much over the next few years. And I think we all think that they might, that the pay, I think it's even accounted for in the budget. I just wondered, it doesn't seem to be accounted for in the public services budget. And also, I just want to ask a question about the agency staff. I know that we are going to look at workforce, and we are going to look at how we reduce our reliance on agency staff, but it is half again the amount is being spent on agency staff. And I just wondered, how are we going to sort of try and reduce that in our budget, because it doesn't look as if it's going down. So are we having staff cuts or what? I don't know. It just looks quite flat across the whole 3 years. Thanks.
Thank you. Who's the best person to come back on that one?
Well, I can start on it anyway. I'm sorry, I'll have to open the document up again. So, are you looking at agency in the place? I think it is, isn't it? Oh, it's in both. But when it says external contracts, I think that's a more accurate description than agency, to be honest, because I think a lot of this, and again, Sheila may be able to assist you more with this, but I think this is not necessarily short-term taking people on to do things. Some of it will be, but I think that some of that may relate to contracts for, I don't know, for instance, for the bailiffs that we employ for certain circumstances for council tax. So I don't, and it's not necessarily something that it would be useful or productive or cost effective for us to do ourselves. That's not to say we can't always look at external contracts, and they are looked at when they're renewed to ensure that either we get value for money or that they are something that is appropriate to be dealt with by way of a contract or some sort of agency. But I don't think it's necessarily the most helpful heading. In terms of the salaries, we certainly do expect that. I mean, I appreciate what you mean about it shows it at the same amount as you go across, but nevertheless, if you look in the budget itself, you'll see that we have budgeted this year for a 5% growth in salaries, and for the 2 years thereafter, at the moment, we're budgeting at 2%. Now, whether that's going to be enough or how the pay is actually going to pan out this year, who knows at the moment, but nevertheless, we certainly are anticipating that there are going to be increases in the salary. So it's not the expectation at the moment that either people will remain on a flat with no rise, or that we will be reducing the headcount.
Thank you for that, Councillor Dacre. That seems to be fully answered, I think. Is that all right for you, Audrey? Does that answer your question for you?
Yeah, it's just that on that budget summary sheet, it does show a pretty much a flat line. So I understand what you're saying about it's included in the headline figures, but why isn't it shown across the department? That's all I'm asking. And with regard to the agency staff, a while back, you know, is there any consideration of not using bailiffs, especially at a time in austerity when it might not be as cost effective?
Sorry, well, again, I mean, I will go back to finance and check up the position on the finance on the flat salaries. But in terms of employing bailiffs, I don't think the council has an obligation to try to collect council tax. It's got an obligation to the rest of the council taxpayers in the borough to do its best to keep its collection rate as high as it possibly can. And a part of that is going to be using bailiffs. Now, you'll know that we've invested in staff to try to catch people early when they are getting into difficulties. So there's actually proactive work goes on in the council to try and spot somebody who appears to maybe not be paying on time when they were paying on time, and they will reach out to those people to try and help them. And enforcement with bailiffs is always a last resort, and there should have been lots of steps that the council goes through before it arrives at that. And if there are instances of bailiffs behaving inappropriately when they are used, then they should always be brought to the council's attention so that we can take that up with the company. But unfortunately, it is not possible for us to say that we will never use bailiffs in any circumstances.
Yeah, thank you for that. Before I bring in Councillor Holsworth, Councillor Lynn, you've got your hand up as well. I suspect you want to augment that response.
Yes, I did actually. Yes. No, thank you very much, Audrey. I mean, I'll leave it to Councillor Dacre to answer the questions about the kind of generalised issue about salary increase and so on. Referring us back, of course, to her introductory remarks about the fact that unfortunately government's only giving us a 1-year settlement, so we're balancing the budget this year, recognising that there will be changes that we're going to have to make in 24, 25 and 25, 26. But we like to try and see if we can do a 3-year budget so that at least people have an idea of the direction of travel. But I just want to go back to the issue about agency staff and so on. And I think that some of that, I rather think some of that will actually relate to project staff who may have been brought in for particular projects, but Sheila may be able to enlighten you a bit more on that. But I would just want to reassure everybody that that our early intervention team, in terms of dealing with proactively contacting people about their if they've got significant council tax arrears, has actually proved to be one of the more successful things that we've been doing over the last 12 to 18 months. I think the figures are something like 75–80% of the people that we contact, that we ring up and so on and say, look, are you aware that this is the situation with your council tax arrears? Can we come to an arrangement? Can we help? Is there, people are almost universally, certainly 3/4 of the people that we contact are very grateful for the contact that's made by our staff, and I'd like to pay tribute to the staff that are involved in that, because sometimes people are just very grateful, because what we're also able to do is working alongside other colleagues in perhaps people like Noah's Ark and Citizens of Ice and so on. If it's not just the council tax that's causing people a headache, then we're able to actually signpost and connect people to other sorts of support with their finances. So there's some good work going on behind the scenes. That's all I wanted to draw attention to. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Holdsworth, good evening.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, hello, good evening, everybody. This was really a question about the parking charges. I noticed that there were comments made in the paperwork for this evening that there was already predicted to be a slowdown in footfall of people going into the centre of Halifax for shopping, for the nighttime economy, etc. And I just wondered, given the rise in the Bank of England rate to income to 4%, the 4.49 projected rise in the terms of council tax, this is going to have an impact, I'm sure, on people's disposable income, an increasing one. And I just wondered, how much revenue has charging until 8 p.m. generated to date compared with a projected fall in footfall to come over the next, well, possibly a year, hopefully less. So just a question there about that.
Thank you. Would you like to come back?
Would you like me to come back? Would you like me to come back on that, Councillor Dickinson?
Thank you. Yes, that'd be excellent. Thank you, Councillor.
Yes. Right. Well, I've certainly made a note of the, of your request, Councillor Holdsworth, to know what the projected income, how the projected income in terms of the extension of parking charges to 8 o'clock compares with the actual. And I know that Ian and I can have a go at seeing if we can get that information for you. But what I can tell you is that, in terms of your comment about how has it affected the footfall, the impression that we have is no, that it hasn't. There was considerable discussion before that extension to 8 p.m. was introduced, and I think there will always be certain circumstances where people might say, "Oh dear, I'm not. That's really awkward. I was going to go and have a meal at 7 o'clock, and it's really difficult. I don't know whether to put, to pay to park my car and so on." But on the whole, we've had. I think I'm right in saying that we've had no actual appeals against any imposition of parking charges if people haven't actually paid for that extended period. But thank you for your question, and I'll certainly get it to you. But on a more general point about the interaction between parking charges and the vibrancy of our town centres and so on, it's kind of quite a complicated one, really, because particularly during the daytime. On the one hand, people want to be able to nip into town in the car and park on the street and just go into the shop. But what we also face is the need to make sure that we're not in a situation where people who work in the town centre, if the parking charges are too low and if there aren't time restrictions on them, what you're simply getting is commuters parking quite close to the town centre. So in some senses, although it might sound a bit counterintuitive, actually having parking charges does ensure that there's a turnover. And in some of our towns, for example, I was in Hebden Bridge just a couple of weeks ago. You know, you've got a situation where you can park for an hour for a very low, actually for a relatively low amount, and it's just enough for you to go and use the shops, really. And I think it's 20 pence or something for that hour. So we are going to review that. We did have a parking strategy paper which was approved by Cabinet, I think in about September or October, and that was really trying to think about what are we trying to achieve with our parking strategy generally across the borough, in terms of our encouragement to people to, you know, walk and cycle and all the rest of it, but also recognising, and the other point I want to make is that it's really important that we actually protect the spaces that we've got, which are, for example, the spaces that are targeted at people who've got a disability badge and so on, so that we try to recognise that there will always be some people for whom being able to park right in the middle of town is really important. But what we're actually saying to people is if you're prepared to park a little bit further outside the centre of the town, then you will find, particularly on our off-street car parking, they're very good value and they remain good value. Sorry about that. You shouldn't have got me started on parking charges. Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Lynn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that should anybody be truly bored, they could go and look at the parking strategy that Cabinet agreed a month or so ago, which will inform any further future discussions that we have about parking and how you deal with the hierarchies and the sorts of things that Councillor Lynn's been talking about. So it's a fascinating read.
I'm sure it is. Thank you, Councillor Baker. Do we have any other questions before I weigh in? Not at this stage, but if you come up with something, I'd be keen to hear from you, members. That'd be great. I think this was a Councillor Dacre and or officers. Yes, quite possibly actually one involving Sheila, actually, with regard to regeneration strategy and specifically the planning department. I do remember that I think it was £300,000 was included in the budget for the planning department with a view to recruitment. I notice for subsequent years that seems to be reducing now to £200,000 a year. So I'm guessing that will hopefully be also additional staff. Am I correct in thinking that it was initially projected that it was going to be £300,000 uplift each year for the next couple of years, and maybe not for the final year of the 3-year projected period that we've got under discussion this evening? And how much of that, do we have any figures as to how much of that money was actually spent in the current year? Did we manage to recruit in the way that we'd hoped? I know this is going to be a difficult one as far as it goes with regard to finding fully formed planning officers springing from the ground and leaping to Calderdale to come and work for us. But just wondering how it went, basically.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so what we were allocated in the budget in the last financial budget process was a £300,000 contribution towards the strategy work required for the local plan, and that was a one-off allocation. And then there was an additional £300,000 for salaries, and that was £300,000 as a part-year commitment to a £430,000 ongoing recurring investment in the planning service. So you will recall, Chair, from the work we've done on the service improvement plan, that in order to get a fit for purpose planning service within what we thought was a reasonable budget envelope, we needed to uplift the planning services budget by £430,000, 35,000. So in terms of that revenue investment, yes, we have spent it. So there has been £300,000 spent in terms of strategy work required for the local plan process, and members will be aware that we received last week the final report from the inspector, which will be going through the Cabinet and Council process in the coming weeks. The part year allocation of £300,000 for salaries, we have spent, and just it touches on the conversation earlier that Councillor Lynn was responding to around agency and so on. So what we are trying to do is establish a stable and steady staff team. To some extent, we've been very successful. We've made some fantastic appointments. And those of you who've met Ruth Hardingham, for example, will know that she's making a tremendous difference in our development management team. Paul Copeland has been recruited internally as our policy lead, and he's doing a fabulous job. And you know, the reward of that is the local plan letter that we've received. But we've also been doing substantial work on the garden communities to take that work forward. The reality is that that is the steady state situation for planning. We have had to have where we've lost officers and they've moved on. And I have to say, mostly they're moving on for positive reasons now, which I think was possibly not the case in previous years. So people are moving on for promotion and progression or for family reasons. We are now going through a recruitment process, and my understanding is that the last process we went through for principal policy officers and planning officers, we are likely to have been able to fill all of those posts. So whilst we're not out of the woods, I would hate to say that we've kind of cracked it. We haven't. This is a continuing work in progress. We are in a much better position. And actually, I think the reputation of the team and the work that we're doing here is helping. And we talked a lot about being positive and proactive and building that relationship with landowners and developers and house builders. And that's exactly what we're doing. So yes, we have spent the resource that was invested. And yes, I anticipate that we will spend more in the next financial year. And we will likely see growth. And just adding on from that in terms of the income that Councillor Dacre and Councillor Lynn have referred to, because we are working on some large schemes and because we are delivering in a way that we possibly weren't previously, we are able to enter into planning performance agreements. So where we have significant applications, we are having dedicated funding to bring in the teams we need. So what we're looking at is having that blended team. So where we need to, we're bringing in specialist consultants and advisors and support, but wherever possible, we're building our team capacity and capability. So it feels like a very positive story. And I know we'll be coming back to Scrutiny to update further on the service improvement plan this quarter. So look forward to telling you more about that then.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, can you give an example, Sheila, of where you have, you know, where we brought in sort of expert help to get things, you know, bigger projects?
I can, Councillor, I can give a couple of very different examples. So some of the work that we're doing, the local plan is it's a once in a 15-year exercise. You know, this is not something that councils do routinely, and it's obviously, you know, we've been waiting for our local plan for a long time. So in order to assist our officers and to build that capacity and expertise and share some learning, we've brought in an organisation called Local Partnerships. And local partnerships are a joint venture between government, the Treasury, and the Local Government Association and the Welsh Government. And what they have is they have a core team of expert staff, many of whom have got private sector experience and commercial experience that just doesn't generally exist within councils, but they also have a structure which allows them to bring associate members in. We don't have to procure local partnerships because they're part of the local government family. You may remember that used to be called TECL status, where we don't have to go out competitively. And they've been very, very helpful in terms of taking the work forward at a pace that we couldn't have done on our own and providing consistency and continuity, but also upskilling our own staff. So I've seen directly the benefit that the planning officers and the confidence they've gained in having that expert advice embedded within the team. So that's been a really successful example. We also have an interim planning advisor who's working with us, who's previously worked as a planning inspector, and she's been taking a lead role on some of the complex applications we've had. She actually lives in Todmorden. I'm not going to tell you her name, just in case you know her. But she's been absolutely phenomenal, and she's been working right across the team on some of those complex applications. And again, embedding that experience and expertise and working with the team. So I'm very much a supporter of having that blended economy. I don't want to be doggedly stuck to having in-house staff because sometimes that's not the right answer. So I hope that helps, Councillor Smith. I'm sure I can think of more examples if you want them.
No, that's really, really interesting. But my actual question, Chair, if I may, could I
Please,
ask
yeah.
the other question I was going to ask? Yeah, just basically, we did have we had waste and recycling as a report to Scrutiny, and that was going to come back, and we were going to have a look at the you know, it was going to be an ongoing piece of work. How are we getting on with that piece of work, to look into other methods of collection and comparing ourselves to other local authorities? How is that piece of work going? And will we be seeing it back at Scrutiny before we have it as another cabinet report?
Chair,
Yeah,
would you like me to come in?
I was waiting for a volunteer. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I don't think we volunteered to set up a piece of work, that was going to be done by this scrutiny panel. I think what we did say was that we were going away and we were going to be looking at the waste services and the whole question about what happens beyond 2024 when the current contract with Suez is scheduled to come to an end if it's not extended. But I was kind of assuming, and you'll be discussing your work programme in a minute, Chair, I was kind of assuming that you might very well want to, perhaps in the next municipal year, I don't know, but you might very well want that, the question of an update really on where we're up to with waste services and so on, and so that we can have a good discussion about that, and we'd be very happy to come back. But we didn't at the end of the last time, we didn't make any commitment to say, well, we're going to set up another working party or we're going to do something else. That wasn't the outcome of the discussion that we had. But we'd be only too happy to come back, and would expect to come back to talk about the different aspects of waste services in due course, but not immediately. That's all I'm saying.
I didn't expect a working party. I just wanted an update on where things were, because it's obviously highlighted for the coming year, and had it on our work programme for this year. And I just wondered how we were getting on in timescales and looking at.
Well, just to say that we've set up internally a project board which Ian will obviously be taking charge of, that's looking at the whole question of our waste services and the different options and the different ways in which that could be delivered. We've initiated that work. We're only just at the beginning of it really, and when we're a little bit further down the line, we're only too happy, Chair, to come back and share some of that ongoing, the outputs of that ongoing work with this panel.
Yes, thank you. I'm sure it's a subject that's keen to close to a lot of people's hearts, I think, not just to councillors. So look forward to that one. Thank you for that one, Councillor Smith. I'd like to ask a question, if I may. Well, first of all, I want to start off by sort of saying, I think it seems as though what's been done has been fairly promising with regards to reducing the MTFS projected forecast deficits. So I don't want to dwell on 24, 25, 25, 26, because I share your frustration at not having that longer term settlement in place. There's nothing like forward planning to help go along so you know where you are. So I will stick with 23, 24. So the forecast deficit seems to have come down from 10.2 to 3.8 million. And just bear with me 1 second as I look at the papers on page 27, therefore, we're left with, call it 3.8 to keep things simple. But I did notice that there's going to be other centrally controlled earmarked reserves of 2.4 and other service controlled earmarked reserves of £192,000, which are going to be used. That still suggests we've got a bit of that 3.8 deficit. So in terms of offering a balanced budget, I'm just wondering how that's going to be achieved, please. Unless there's something I missed in the report.
Yeah, okay. I know. Yes, it is quite confusing. But if you go on to the, I don't. Yeah. So underneath that updated MTF position that you refer to in that little table.
Yeah.
You see the cabinet budget proposals.
Sorry. So Oh, there we are. Page 24.
I'm just trying to see what page it is on your.
Yes, it is.
23.
It's page 24. Yeah.
Between 23 and 24. Oh,
No,
yes, it's more though. Original empty, yeah. Settlement and other changes, yeah. Updated position.
And then
proposals.
it says cabinet budget proposals immediately under that.
Yes.
And it refers to the fact that when we did that calculation, well, not me, but when the calculation was done that gave that updated position, it was on an assumption
Right,
of
gotcha.
a 3% rise in council tax.
Yeah, that
And
squares
in
the
fact,
circle.
that's been increased to 5. So that cut into it. And then the second one is the other one that I mentioned. It's the active management of investments, and higher interest rates are expected to bring in, it says therefore could amount to 3 million this year and slightly less afterwards. And so those two steps together brought us to a position where not only did we no longer have to make any cuts, but we also had the small amount of headroom that's referred to, the contingency, because the way things are in our current world, there's bound to be things that we need to spend a bit of money on. So that's how we bring it down to the balanced budget.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed for that. Yes, I did miss that actually. Didn't fully register with that. Well, that leads me on to actually in terms of the active management of the reserves. I noticed since I've been in council that there's always been a very small c conservative approach to those, with very minimal rates of return. So essentially what you're confirming there is that we're now looking at more active management and more trying to generate a better rate of return on those reserves and investments.
Well, I think one of the main reasons we had a minimal rate of return was that interest rates were so low, and there's always been active management in the sense that the reserves are looked at all the time. Investments are just continually reviewed. Somebody in the council sits there reviewing it all the time, trying to make the best of it. But interest rates were low, so primarily it's expected that it will benefit just from the higher interest rate. But yes, we obviously at the moment we have an interim head of finance who has her ideas, and she may feel that some things are appropriate which maybe haven't been tried before, and they'll have to be considered. But I mean, there's always a balance between perhaps trying to be a bit more adventurous, but also you've got to balance any risks against that. So there's always that balance to have. And as I say, I think the primary benefit is simply going to come from higher interest rate, and it's why in the years after this year, it's forecast to reduce, because we anticipate that interest rates, or we hope in a way that interest rates will be coming down because the economy may have settled down.
Yeah, I'm guessing there are also legal constraints on how that money can be invested. So it's not like we can suddenly start investing in playing the stock market with those reserves, is there? No,
clearly not. And I mean, again, I wouldn't wish it upon anybody, but there are documents that are produced each year with the Treasury management strategy in them. And so if you're interested, when the next one comes out next year, you may want, if you could really be bothered, you could look at how it compared to the previous ones and whether there was any alteration in the nature of the investments, because if you look at it at the moment, it sets out a sort of a hierarchy of potential investments with the most secure at the top, and there are limits for each category. And the way to see is when we're obviously going to get a permanent head of finance sometime in the next financial year. So it may be interesting to see whether any of that hierarchy changes, whether any of the amounts, the limits on investment within those categories are changed, or whether there are other alterations.
Smashing, thank you. Yeah, which panel does that tend to come back to? Is it audit or is it strategy and performance, would you say?
It's certainly all those go to audit. I think they do go to strategy and performance as well. I'm sure they do after, because that's part of the recommendation is that they go there.
Right, lovely. Thank you.
I mean, they're so dry that it's really hard for people to be enthused about examining them closely, really.
No, I appreciate that. Numbers aren't my strength either. Just one quick question from me, and it's an idiot's guide to answer, really. I think I'm looking for discretionary income. Is that the same as what is discretionary income, please? Somebody, I didn't understand what that actually means. And then Councillor Smith.
Sorry, where are we looking at the moment on that?
Sorry, yeah. Discretionary income. Where did I see it? I think it was fairly early in the report, actually. I think it's more to do with understanding what that means in terms of jargon busting more than anything else. I tell you what, I'll bring in Councillor Smith if whilst I have a quick look, see if I can find that where it is, and perhaps you can help me on that one.
Okay,
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, just about the budget cuts to last year. Did we sort of start from a clean slate this year? Did we make all the cuts necessary and we started from sort of zero, or are there outstanding cuts from last year that we sort of are going to carry forward?
I suppose it partly depends what you mean by carry forward. I mean, once a cut is made, it's made, and you have to keep on making it every year. There were some cuts that couldn't come into effect for a year. So like a hark back to the town and parish council grants and council tax reduction subsidy that they got, that didn't take effect immediately. And sometimes you then find that you have decided on a cut, and in that first year, a directorate can struggle to actually implement that cut. And if that happens, then they end up having to find the money somewhere else effectively to make up for that. So I couldn't necessarily say that every directorate has succeeded in making every single penny of the saving that it was supposed to, but if it didn't, it had to compensate for it in some other way, and will continue to try to meet that target. And in the budget challenges that we hold with them, they are held, the directorates are held to account on those. It's not just left, and we don't, I mean, I can't call any immediately to mind now, but it is kept a track of. And if it's not happening, it's why isn't it happening? And ultimately, it might be that there would have to be a reconsideration if there was something that was just stubbornly refusing to be able to be saved, and maybe circumstances had changed, and actually we realised that we needed that cut in its entirety wasn't the appropriate way forward, then we might revisit it. But mostly revisit that portion of it. But as I say, they are kept check on.
Can I just ask one more question,
Of
Chair?
course, please. Yeah, we've got the time, and it's the Smith and Dickinson show at the minute.
So yeah, sorry about that. It's really about I suppose the contingency in terms of people, the I don't know, the economic crisis, basically the cost of living crisis, as we're calling it this time, where people we will see a rise in people needing discretionary housing payments and things like that. And I know that some of that funding comes directly from government, but have we got, do we have discretionary funds that we might need to use our headroom for? Is that something that we might be considering to sort of try and buffer, those that are in desperate need?
That's not the intention at the moment, I don't think. I mean, somewhere again, it's not in this report, but buried somewhere, or in one of the recent financial reports, is the fact that we recently received a sum of money back from the court service for where they decided that fees had been overpaid, and they gave us some money back, and that money did go into one of the household support funds or something of a similar nature. So we chose, instead of putting it back into the general budget, we chose to direct it towards helping those who were struggling. But no, that's at the moment, the anticipation is that that money is there for things that we didn't necessarily expect to have to spend, whereas, and it is very difficult because as I think you probably know, something like the discretionary housing payments, the amount of money we get from government doesn't cover what the cost to us, and so it makes it very difficult for us to fulfill to do what we'd like to do with supporting people.
Thank you. Yeah, my previous question has been answered. I've got a message through on the chat, so yeah, we don't need to go down that road. However, can I bring you to the bottom of page 23 and on to page 24? We've discussed the parking charges review. I'm happy with the answer there. The buildings rationalisation, I'd like to ask a small question about that. The salary and cost rebasing exercise and the waste delivery review, we've looked at those already, thank you. But I think close to the hearts with it's going to be the highways program and well, inevitably it's that question about potholes, isn't it? The statement there, does our expenditure align with our income, and can we confirm this service provides value for money? Can we drill down into that and expose what that's actually trying to say, please? I would think for myself that it would have more, having grown up in Devon, which has got, I think, the Britain's largest county road network, that the highways program in terms of maintenance is going to be more to do with the miles per head of population than it is anything else than necessarily with income. The service providing value for money. I mean, are you talking about a recosting, re-tendering exercise, or what's on people's minds?
Sheila, do you want to come in first?
I can, Councillor Dacre, yes. So Councillor Dickinson, this proposal was put forward. You will recall that this comes up, I think, pretty much at every budget setting exercise as an area of significant expenditure that is reviewed, and there is an element of discretion around how we set the bar around what we will do and won't do. So what Isabel and our colleagues in finance wanted to do was just unpick that a little bit. So rather than put it through as a budget proposal for this budget setting exercise, was just to do a bit of a deep dive and really get under the surface of what is happening with highways revenue maintenance budgets, but also the capital funds that we spend, because members will be aware that we do prioritise the revenue works, but we also look at where our capital programmes are going to be investing so that we don't spend revenue in advance of a capital programme. So it was just unpicking some of that and working across the delivery teams, both in my area through Adrian Gill and the strategic infrastructure team, but also with colleagues in Andrew's service, Andrew Pitts and Jonathan Cole, and just making sure we're being as efficient and effective as we can be. I think the reality is we all know that the budget is very limited. We know that we're generally probably not meeting member and community expectations. So it's not an area where you will find significant savings, but we are looking at whether or not we're being as efficient as we can be, whether or not our procurement routes are the most efficient and delivering best value for money. But that is in the context that we've discussed previously around rising costs and inflation and volatility in the construction sector that's ongoing. So it's not going to be a huge money saver, but what we're trying to do is make sure that what we're doing is efficient and effective.
Right, that brings a lot of clarity for me. Thank you very much indeed. And going back to the buildings question, it's been something that I've been talking about on and off with the buildings rationalisation. And it also ties in with the town regeneration, town centre regeneration as well, in terms of the buildings that we have and their potential disposal for. And I've always previously emphasised this, for example, dignified housing, with emphasis on the word dignified. And when it says considering alternatives, is this greater use of, for example, work from home, or moving out of town, as it were, to sort of lower overhead buildings? What does that mean in a bit more detail there, please?
Okay, Chair. So this again is a recommendation from our colleagues in finance, and it's just looking at the continuing delivery of the Future Council programme and the estate rationalisation that you've all seen over recent years. And in the last 9 years, we've saved over £40 million in revenue budgets, and we've 40% and saved £40 million over 9 years and reduced our revenue budgets by 40%. There is very little that we can do quickly or easily now. So the rationalisation will depend on reconfiguration of services, either doing things differently, operating in a different way that doesn't require a business base and so on. But there are no kind of easy pickings anymore. This is about really serious service configuration. And so we're relying on other colleagues to work differently. So that will take time. The team in the estates team, led by Alan, attend management teams at least twice a year to review their plans for property so that we can pick up any potential opportunities for consolidation or efficiency. And the team are also actively involved in the One Public Estate programme through West Yorkshire Combined Authority, so that we can broaden that review across the public sector estate more generally. But there is no easy money there, and it is very much dependent on our colleagues across the council working in a different way, Chair.
Yes, thank you very much indeed for that, Sheila. I appreciate that. Councillor Smith again.
Sorry, it's taking advantage of it, but
oh no, go for it. I mean, this is
Sheila, I was just wondering about two things really, just on what you were saying about highways. In the capital budget for a highways project, do they have a sort of an amount for revenue to repair all the roads that get messed up in the process of making the new scheme? Because the roads around the bus station are a complete mess. I'm sure that hasn't been helped by all the heavy sort of vehicles going along. And the second thing was how CAFM had a plan to sort of rationalise and get rid of those sort of long lease properties that the council were leasing. How has it got on with that? And yeah, that's my questions.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. Thanks, Chair. So you'll be aware, just in terms of the highways, as I've mentioned, the capital works, we also take into account what activity is happening in the area. So we'll look at the towns programme, we'll look at major construction, because there is wear and tear when you have those types of vehicle movements. Having said that, they are very heavily trafficked bus routes because it's going to the bus station. But yes, I mean, they will all be monitored and inspected as part of that inspection routine. And we work very closely with colleagues in Andrew's service around some of the, for example, if they have to bring in an enhanced sweeping routine because of the disturbance of the surface and that wear and tear. So all of that gets factored in. What we wouldn't do generally, all being well, is do a major resurfacing programme right in advance of that kind of capital construction work. So as far as possible, we try and join the dots on all of that. With regards to the long lease properties, there are a number of long lease properties that we will retain, for example, Mulcher House, but you'll be aware that Westgate House, where we've moved our teams out and we sublet to another organisation, we will come out of that in, I think it's next financial year, 2024. So those pieces of work are ongoing and completing, and we've got other examples such as Carlton Mill, where we've come out of there, and we're always looking at opportunities to contract that estate and be as efficient as possible. And sometimes that does mean having a lease building. That might be the right answer, but the property team are monitoring all the time, and they're also looking at the cost of those buildings in terms of maintenance and energy costs, because one of the biggest costs that we've got at the moment that's out of our control is the cost of energy. And you know that the price of electricity has gone up 248%, gas has gone up 103%, and we're just not budgeted for those kinds of figures. So it's very, very high on the agenda for Alan and his team.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, I've gone through my list. Does anybody else have any questions? Mike.
So if everyone's finished, Chair, it wasn't a question. It was just to remind members of the process from now on.
Yes, please. I was coming to that to ask the question.
So after this evening's discussions, Bella, Diane and myself will pull together a note of the discussion, which will go into a report to Strategy and Performance Scrutiny Board next week. That will have the discussions of adults, health, social care, children, young people, and this discussion. That gives Strategy and Performance a chance to look across the piece at the budget discussions as well as the services they're directly responsible for, and they will turn that into a report to Cabinet on the 13th of February as part of the Cabinet's consultation exercise, and Councillor Robinson, as the chair of Strategy and Performance, will present that report. Thank you.
Right, thank you for that. Yes, there's no particular action that we need to take at this point in time for the board. Right, okay. Might be worthwhile turning up for the Strategy and Performance meeting next week, though. Right, lovely. In that case,
Chair, can I just say that obviously I have been as well anyway, so I'll both be at Strategy and Performance, but also obviously when council reconsider comments on the budget. So I feed back after meetings like this to my colleagues in any event. So then
right.
as well.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Right, in that case, in the absence of anybody else, I'd like to thank members of the Cabinet and officers for their attendance this evening. And I think we're moving on to the next part of the agenda. If I've got that correct, we're now going to be talking about our work programme. Is that right, Mike?
Yeah, I think Bella's going to introduce that, and I hope so.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Scrolling in between the two here. Yes, the work programme number 7. Right, brilliant. In that case, yes, officers and members of the Cabinet, thank you very much indeed for being here this evening. You're free to go. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks,
Excellent.
Committee. Good
Good
night.
to see you all. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Right. Good. That's us. We happy 12. Right. Work programme. Thank you very much. So I got an email from Bella. Was it the March work programme sort of being split down to 2 items?
Yeah, because the 3 items on the work programme for March, the cultural strategy, green spaces and streets, and then the planning update, I thought were 3 chunky items. So myself and Councillor Dickinson have agreed that we'll move the green spaces and streets item onto the next meeting. But yeah. Yeah,
is everyone happy with that? I'm just wondering about a strategy moving forward. Just wondering whether were there any issues close to members' hearts that they would like to bring to the table. I mean, we've got our regular annual slots of various different bits and pieces that come up on a regular basis, whether it's every 3 months, 6 months, every year. Were there any issues that they wanted to have a look at from within the framework of scrutiny going forward? I'm not looking for answers now, but it's something for you guys to think about. But also any particular issues that might require that deeper dive scrutiny a day thinking as well. It was actually really good, for example, when Councillor Helen Rivram came along and wanted to have another look at the domestic abuse issues and find out where we were and the progress made since the last report and the world changing under the pandemic and everything else. And I think CYP have taken that one. So I'd be interested because I think it was this board that initially did the work on that one, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that group is just being set up at the moment, and it's going to be a mixture of members from Place and members from CYP as well. So that's just about to get started.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, it's a few examples of that as well. I mean, I don't want to get us all over commit or anything like that, but certainly didn't want to to put this as a thought in our minds going forwards, especially for anybody who's up for election. They may still want to have something looked at after, perhaps even if they've been voted out, whether it's something they might want to get looked at. So yeah, something to think about. Maybe bring it to the table in March and April as we consider the forward programme then. But otherwise, if everyone's happy, I mean, was there anything else that you wanted to bring to the table in that regard, Mike or Bella, as far as the work programme is concerned? No? Okay, good. So how are we looking for April at the minute? We've got March down to those two items. We are the cultural report and the buildings, the planning. How's April looking like? Do we know yet?
That's the last meeting, 9th of March, I think.
Is it? Oh yes, we're in Perda in April, aren't we? Yes,
Yeah.
of course. Right. Okay. In that case, yeah, give me some thought for the March meeting if that's all right, guys. And yeah, in the meantime, I think we can call it quits there this evening. Unless there's anything else, any other business? No. Thank you very much indeed for your attendance. Take care of yourselves. See you soon.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Bye for now.